Political Economy and Law lecture series. I'm very pleased to present Dr. Alain Parguez. He is an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Franche-Comté in Besançon, France, and was associated with the economics department at the University of Ottawa. He has written extensively on monetary policy, crisis theory, and economic policy, including articles and books on the impact of austerity measures, which he believes are the cause of the world crisis. He is currently writing a book on the general theory of the monetary circuit and its economic policy considerations. The title of this seminar today is The Crisis in the Eurozone, an Extraordinary Event. Thank you for joining us today.
I would add that when in the late 70s I was working with the forthcoming Mitterrand administration, and especially Jacques Attali, who became and Jacques Delors, who became the de facto prime ministers, when the forthcoming monetary union was debated, it was a legacy from history. I shall be back on this question. Debates on the monetary union started in France in the interwar period, and I told Attali and Delors, you are building a monster, and the outcome should be a disaster and a total collapse of the society. And Attali was adamant, it's perfectly possible. This is exactly what the president, the future president, has in mind: a new order allowing us to get rid forever of social legislation, welfare state, unions, powers of the people, and democracy. This morning I read that President Obama qualified your new Prime Minister as the savior of Italian finance. It reminds me, if I dare say, that when Antonio de Oliveira Salazar founded the new order in Portugal, a police state, supported by the church and the secret police, the then French Prime Minister Raymond Poincaré said Oliveira Salazar is the savior of the Portuguese public finance. In a conference in Austin, where I was some days ago, I said that what is now happening in Europe is indeed an extraordinary event, which could be compared to the European plague, Black Plague, who got rid of a third of European population in the mid of the 14th century. The answer to the plague was a special council in Avignon, where the Pope was at that time, and they ordered bonfires for all the enemies of the church. Thousands of people were burned, heretics, midwives, sorcerers, homosexuals and their lives. And this is indeed now the so-called public debt plague is the new black plague, and the answer of core governments, French and Germany, is exactly the same that the Council of Avignon. And before entering the subject, I would quote a speech by Robert Schuman, who soon could be declared blessed by the Vatican. Robert Schuman was the speaker in the French National Assembly of the steel cartel. In 1927, he made a speech which can be found in the wonderful book in French. It should be translated in English by a wonderful historian in France, Madame Lacroix. And Robert Schuman said, we need a European Union to get rid forever of the legacy of enlightenment, protecting European society against Protestants, Jews, Freemasons, American consumer society, trade unions, communists, socialists, etc., etc., etc. So, in the first part, I shall try to explain that the public debt panic is indeed an extraordinary event. John Pierpont Morgan, who was running world finance in the late 19th century, wrote, I recommend all my customers to buy public debt because public debt is the equivalent of gold. And John Pierpont Morgan was a very astute guy. The founder of the Crédit Lyonnais, Henri Germain, wrote in 1902, a banker must essentially hold public debt. Which means that even if those statistics should be dealt with extreme caution, the ratio of public debt to GDP for the gold standard era was much, much higher than it is now. And nobody ever raised any concern about the fact that 90% of the Russian budget was financed by the sale of Russian bonds to French and German bonds, and that 95% of the Greek budget was financed by the same mechanism. But indeed, there was already some worrying event, because the French were a bit worried by the finance of the dying Ottoman Empire, and they created the so-called management commission of the Ottoman debt, controlled by the French, who was in charge of all finance of the Ottoman Empire, which is exactly what is happening now in Greece. Greece is no more an independent country, it is a colony of French and German capitalism. If we take the example of Italy, the ratio of Italian public debt to what we could know about Italian GDP, there are some evaluations by the CIA, are now extremely low relative to their level during the gold standard era and even during the Mussolini regime. The French banks held an enormous amount of Italian debt before 1945, and nobody was ever concerned by the fact that Mussolini told, "I will never pay." So, what happened? I had a discussion, a very recent discussion, and the European debt crisis is an event which never happened in history and which should never have happened, but which is the outcome of the creation of the monetary union, an absurd system violating all the stability and existential conditions of the capitalist economy. I shall briefly explain why it is some kind of a monster which is also without any root in any kind of sensible economic theory. Even Milton Friedman declared that the very notion of an independent central bank is a pure folly. And I shall also explain what is in truth the European Central Bank, and why the European Central Bank chairman is not the Pope. He is only one vote in a council of 22 or 3 members. In the second part, I shall explain why could we explain the creation of such a system as the initiative of the French and the final decision being the decision of François Mitterrand. In a third part, I shall explain why, at a sudden, the system collapsed, and why this crisis is wished by the core governments to impose policies of deflation. In a paper I wrote recently, which could be never indeed published in French, I gave some data on the state of the French economy. It could be compared to the situation of USSR in the last days of Andropov and Gorbachev. And in the last part, I shall try to say yes, there are solutions. But there is not the least political support in the European ruling class for those solutions. So, what could happen? But so, first, the euro system. Even at the time of the gold standard, but in all normal capitalist economies, like USA, Japan, France, before the Mitterrand regime, South Korea, Japan, Canada, etc., there can't be a problem for the public debt. Why? Because the state is financing its expenditures by pure electronic transfers to sellers of services and commodities, which lead to an automatic creation of money in private banks' balance sheet. Taxes, of course, since the very start of the capitalist system, do not finance expenditures. It should be obvious, no more than receipts are financing wages. But when the state runs the deficit, the counterpart is an increase in banks' reserves. But there is another counterpart, the acquisition of banks' claims against the central bank. Therefore, finally, deficits are financed by the central bank. And to comply with pure accounting rules, the states cover the creation of money by the central banks by the sale of bonds. So, not the least problem could happen. The state controls the issue of bonds. It can control interest rates, there can't be any problem. But this is what those who created the euro system wanted to destroy. In some way, they privatized the state. they privatized public expenditures. They dealt with the state as if it were an unproductive private corporation. Thereby, they suppressed any connection between the Treasury and the central bank. They suppressed any possibility of the Treasury to fix the price or the interest rates of bonds. Henceforth, the Treasury was obliged to auction bonds to the private markets, to banks, at interest rates decreed by banks. So, they created, which never existed and never exists elsewhere, the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank, I think, could be suppressed. It is completely useless. Since it is forbidden to help the state to finance its expenditures, it is forbidden to acquire state bonds. It can't control interest rates being fixed by banks. You could tell me, but what about the mandate of inflation? But this is a joke. The central bank doesn't control inflation. According to the central bank's official index, the rate of inflation in Europe should be around 2%. It is now 7.5% in Germany, 8.5% in France, and much higher in Spain, Portugal, and Greece. For simple reasons that prices are driven by taxes imposed by the state, and the fact that, according to John Kenneth Galbraith's wonderful books, firms are imposing increasing prices to raise the share of profit. I shall go back to this point. So, it's obvious that on one side, you have henceforth private debt, which are dealt with are pure private asset. On the other side, the state is decreed a useless corporation, which should be suppressed. Therefore, the value of those assets becomes entirely depending upon speculation. The architects of the system, in some way, wish such an outcome because they hoped that banks will refuse to buy state bonds, would ration the state, and therefore that the state would be obliged to quasi-suppress its expenditures. Attali was quite adamant on this question, and even one of the founders of the regulation school in Europe, history imposed a stateless society. Robert Boyer, for those who matter. The problems was, first, that the more, at the same time, there happened in Europe the start of an evolution of capitalism. Neither Marx nor Lenin nor even Rosa Luxemburg had expected. European capitalism was no more a mode of production, no more a mode of accumulation. They wished indeed profits, but profits without expenditures injected into the real economy. They wanted profits in the form of capital gains out of speculation. So, as soon as the early 80s, in France and Germany, private investment start to collapse. In France now, private investment is below zero. There is not even amortization of real capital. Why? Because the capital, it would require a full course. European capitalism had never been a dynamic system, contrary to the US, or contrary to what is now happening in Japan. It was depending on state expenditures and they were animated by reactionary ideology. So, on one side, you have this evolution, and now European capitalism is obviously a dying system. On the other side, you can prove, which I did in works, that ultimately the system depends as an exogenous factor of planned net investment by the state. I emphasize planned productive investment, which is the creation of capital, even human capital, by the state. I include in human capital education, research, and their likes. But the system resulting from the European system as soon as the late 70s under Raymond Barre and early 80s with François Mitterrand was engaged into permanent austerity and deflation. I am working now on a paper that could be a book on modern austerity policy. Modern austerity policies, French and German style, are extremely different to what was proposed even by a neoclassical, whatever the vintage economic. It is permanent policies, explicitly aiming at reducing state expenditures to impose scarcity and poverty on the economy, to force society to survive quite below what could be deemed the global capacity frontier. For the first time in history, what Marx wrote in Manifesto is no more true of what is now going on. But the more you cut expenditures, and indeed the more, since at the same time there is a decrease in investment, you are increasing deficits because taxes collapsed, social contribution collapsed because people are more and more poor. In France now, the effective rate of unemployment is 60% of population able to work. 6 million people are paid 500 euros a month to get nothing, even very graduate people. So, the states had deficits which were not planned nor wished at all. They were the revenge, if I dare say, of economic laws against medieval ideology. Taking care of the privatization of public finance, the state had to auction bonds. And banks jumped literally on state bonds. Why? Because on one side, corporations were less and less asking for credits because investment increased, as I told you. And since banks and corporations in France and Germany are in a complete incestuous relationship, stockholders of banks are corporations, stockholders of corporations are banks. Indeed, banks never dared to ask high interest rate to corporations. But to the state, with the full complicity of the state, they asked increasing rates of interest to maintain and increase their profits. I say with the full complicity of the state, because since the state had in mind deflation, the higher the interest rates, the more consumption was falling, credit to consumption became unsustainable for most households, and an increasing share of expenditures went to banks through the channel of the payment of interest rates. And the central bank did nothing. Some word of the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank is not the Vatican. It is an oligarchy of independent central banks without any connections with each other. there is no sovereign balance sheet in Frankfurt. The central bank, the Frankfurt office, holds quasi nothing. Public debt are held by the Italian Independent Central Bank, Greek Independent Central Bank, and their like. And it is quite well known that who finally controls the system, the French and the German government. They appoint governors, and a word, when people say, but there is a European Commission, who appoints members of the European Commission? Governments. So, finally, what had in mind the architects of the system? As I told you, they had in mind a total re-engineering of European society by permanent deflation, creating the perfect corporate capitalist society, allowing a total collapse of real wages. Now, the official dream in the French finance minister is that Europe should beat the Chinese by lower real wages, which could happen. So, it was a point. But there was more. There was more than economic logic. There was ideology. The fact that, especially in France and partly in Germany, as a legacy of history, the ruling capitalist elite and the ruling technocrats, they are exactly the same. They hate the welfare state, they hate the American way of life. Never forget that the French media, when they speak of the Mitterrand administration, qualify Mitterrand as a Marxist, which proves their folly and ignorance, but indeed they are fools and ignorant. You can't imagine when you are speaking before an audience of European super technocrats of their degree of both ignorance and ideological fanaticism. This is extremely worrying. It doesn't exist, I think, in the USA. So, a weird system was finally implemented. The more real economy was collapsing, the more the share of profit increased, and the more the value of private assets rose, while real profits in terms of Kaletsky were dropping. It was exactly the same for the value of public bonds. Everybody knows that Greece, Italy will never pay back the debt. It doesn't matter. The value depends on the degree of deflation and finally on the rate of unemployment which is imposed on European people. You could tell me, but they tried To all, no. It is a pure hoax. Until now, the so-called European emergency funding is a pure hoax. Governments sell bonds to banks, banks buy those bonds, the proceeds goes back to bank to repay a share of public debt of Greece and the large. But at the same time, Greece has been transformed into some kind of part of the French colonial empire. I can't understand why a prime minister of an independent country like Papa Andreou could have accepted that his country is now in the same situation that the Ottoman Empire at the time of Abdul Hamid II. It is not a very rewarding example. So, why finally the crisis? Well, in a system entirely depending on expectations, on bets on the future, without any more connection with the real economy, the possibility of a total reversal of expectations was and should have been and maybe had been expected. Everybody knew the amount of the great public debt. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew the amount of the Italian public debt. It is a show to pretend that it was a great surprise. But first, there happened the 2008 financial crisis in the USA, entirely caused by the collapse of the Babel Tower of derivatives and pure private assets. The value of American bonds was never jeopardized. Never. But what happened? European banks had borrowed a lot of money to American banks. They had such a confidence into the euro that they borrowed zillions of dollars to American bonds to invest those dollars out of the Eurozone, especially in Eastern Europe, Russia, South America, and the like. The Americans asked French and German banks, we want our money back. But they don't have dollars. And the European central banks had not reserves in dollars. So, the system entirely depended upon swaps, upon loans by the American Treasury. But it was not enough. There happened a total reversal of expectations. The value of banks' assets collapsed. And especially the value of those assets which were the more in doubt public bonds, because they were assets of state which had been declared parasite useless creations. What triggered the crisis? What was, if I dare say, the October 1918 revolution in European capitalism? Who was the Lenin and Trotsky? Was the Sarkozy and the Merkel regime, especially the French. Because contrary to what many people believe, the French are leading the game, and Sarkozy could be using Mussolinian rhetoric or an Hitlerian rhetoric against the speculators is the fault. The governments completely surrendered their authority to speculators and rating agencies. The rating agencies became some kind of last judgment of European finance. They start to decrease that even their own finance were bankrupt. The first to raise the question of over-indebtedness was the French government, when in 2006, Sarkozy, as finance minister, appointed a commission who decreed that the French state was bankrupt. The result was indeed that now speculation could no more be controlled. The government reacted by imposing more deflation. Deflation indeed to Greece. The real economy of Greece is completely destroyed. To Spain, etc., and to their own economy. In the span of 3 months, the Sarkozy regime imposed by emergency legislation 3 plans of austerity. Emergency legislation because the parliament is completely outside the game. Thereby, more poverty, more unwanted deficit, more debt without any value, etc. And now they are in a situation which is completely out of their control, which is raising a question, and my last point, on which I shall try to be brief. What could be the future? It's obvious that, as such, the system cannot survive and must not survive. The European economy, the real economy, is now dying. It is quite below the American level in every term. Sometimes people say, but how could we explain that there was no, the Greeks were obliged to import, but because of the extreme overvaluation of the euro, Greece, Spain, Portugal, industrial base was wiped out. Greece lost tourism to Turkey and their allies. So, there are obviously many options. The first is that nothing is done And what could happen? Collapse, disparition of the euro, political crisis. I take the example of France. 39% of the French electorate are now supporting the neo-Nazi party, because the Parti Socialiste asked for more austerity than the regime. There could be solutions, indeed. The solution should be the creation, the total reconstruction of the euro system. For instance, the creation of a European monetary fund responsible before the European Parliament, issuing bonds bought by the European Central Bank, losing its preposterous statute of independence, and thereby it could be the existence condition of a New Deal for Europe, a reconstruction of the European economy. For how long Germany and France could survive with outrageous poverty, rates of unemployment, collapse of purchasing power, because a very short word on Germany. Joseph wrote wonderful papers on the German industrial core, but it was a legacy of the Nazi regime and of Albert Speer in the last days of the Nazi regime, who invested zillions into the German industry, endowing the German industry with such a capacity and innovations which could not be embodied into the production process before some years. As for the French, they didn't have that advantage because of the colonial empire. And now I must say that France is now going back to colonial empire. Ivory Coast is again a French colony. The French intervene in Libya, so it's well told. But the problem is that there is not the least political constituency amid the ruling elite for such a New Deal. There is no Roosevelt in Europe. There is not even a Barack Obama, whatever we could say of Obama, but a fanatical ruling class without any debate and discussion. I must say that your institute is a miracle. It couldn't exist in France. I am invited everywhere but in France, because to discuss policy is completely forbidden and outside the possibility. There is even more open-mindedness in China. So this is a question, and I would say that I wrote a lot, I tried a lot. I must say that only the people and only the revolt of the people can impose a change on European policy. If not, we could expect some kind of a Fourth Reich. I am in full agreement with our colleague from Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, now we have a Fourth Reich, with Madame Merkel on one side, Sarkozy and François Hollande, the leader of the Socialist Party. We have already some kind of Fourth Reich ruling Europe, Southern Europe, Greece, are colonies. Now, just a source of import. But it is a tragedy, because the collapse of Europe would have a devastating impact on the world economy. Already, the Chinese are extremely worried. Chinese exports to Europe are dropping. Now, South Korea, Taiwanese exports are dropping. In the US, elections are soon. And the problem is that the Republican right in Europe, in the US, is more and more asking for a European policy style to maintain the value of the dollar, because the euro is overvalued by at least 40 and 50%. There is a policy war. Everybody knows that. At the last G20 meeting in Cannes, thanks to God, neither Obama understands French nor Sarkozy English. Translators were quite embarrassed. Their debate was not very friendly. Sarkozy accused Obama of being a Marxist. I am not sure that the translator were to translate. So, the whole world could be engaged into a spiraling process of world deflation, political crisis, and I think it is still time to stop the process, but really it is time to prevent the apocalypse. Thank you.
Always asking the question. Do you think that many people, they put their bank, now in Italy for instance, there is a consensus in the top, the banking system, etc., they like Mr. Monti, right? And they think that he will do two things. This is what comes out very clearly by reading the financial paper of Italy, which is Il Sole 24 Ore. They said they really think that Monti can do two things. On one hand, it can prevent speculation on Italian bonds, number one. Number two, they think that he can convince with Mario Draghi together, they can convince Germany and France to accept European bonds.
Well,
What do you think?
you raised a very important issue. It's obvious that for a very long time, whatever we could think of it, Mario Monti was a guy of the European ruling class. Why do they wish Mario Monti? Because he could squeeze Italian to death. While Berlusconi was deemed too populist. I was told by Mario Monti could be the new Antonio Oliveira de Salazar of Italy. Convince Sarkozy and Merkel and the Draghi. But I repeat, the chairman of the European Central Bank has only one vote in the Council of Governors. Only one. All decisions are taken by a unanimous vote of the 17 governors of central banks plus the 4 representatives of Frankfurt. So, as such, the chairman of the European Central Bank, as I told you, is not the Pope, contrary to what many people believe. Second, European bonds. The European Central Bank, yes, but what does exactly that mean? If it means selling bonds to whom? I must say, to banks. So, to save banks, they could agree, but certainly not for a European New Deal. That they will never agree. Never. I go back to the European bonds. It would make sense if, on one side, the issue of bonds was not included into German and French debt. Second, if those bonds were acquired by the European Central Bank, for the moment, there is a strong no. The European Central Bank, or the French and the German, are quite explicit. First, as I told you, only to save banks' net worth. Only that. And by the way, nobody knows exactly what are the amount of banks' losses. There is not the least sensible evaluation. I do suspect that banks overestimated their losses, but this is not the core question. The agreement would depend on one condition. Squeeze, squeeze, and squeeze, and squeeze the people. I could assure you, with my interventions at the European Investment Bank, that on austerity policies, they will never relinquish their ideology. And what is expected of Mario Monti is that he will do what Berlusconi never dared to do. On this question, they are quite explicit. And as I told you, the European bonds will not solve the question of the collapse of the real economy You see, sometimes, like Riccardo Bellofiore and Jan Toporowski, between us we say that when we speak to an audience of post-Keynesians, we feel back to our classical Marxist roots and vice versa. It's obvious that I am working on this question. There is some truth in some kind of labor value, generalization of the labor value. The problem is that in countries which are in full deflation, in free fall, the value of assets rely on absolutely nothing. As I told you, I take care the example of France because I studied more the question. But in a country which is at least for 2 or 3 years suffering from negative growth, whatever we could say of growth, at 2 or 3% a quarter, the value of assets is really relying on some kind of abyss, you see. So, obviously, let us be frank, what people expect of Mario Monti is some kind of neo-Mussolinian regime. And this is quite obvious when you discuss with those people. It's clear, like Sarkozy. France is no more in a state of democracy. Sarkozy is relying on emergency legislation, using despicable rhetoric against the bankers and speculators, which is pure hypocrisy. And the advisors of the French Socialist Party, who are they? One of them, we know him, is a former Communist Party, next Socialist, next Sarkozy, but as an advisor of François Hollande and financial advisor of the Rothschild Bank. The second is the Franco-American, appointed by an American thinking tank because to impose more austerity. And the third is the nothingness, which doesn't deserve any mention. So, but as I told you, I am still expecting to know what are exactly banks' balance sheets in Europe. Nobody knows that, and nobody can know that. The Société Générale, which was sold in bankruptcy, just recorded the most enormous profits for the last 10 years. So, this is what I suspect, is that banks include in their losses on public debt a large amount of their losses on their over-speculation on pure private assets, derivative and their likes. I took another example. Everybody speaks of public debt. I don't dare to speak of sovereign debt. there are no more sovereign states in Europe, but meanwhile, in France, how people survive with wages dropping, no hope for people on debt, under personal research, thanks to the CIA Economic Research Fund and personal estimations. French households survive on debt. The ratio of household debt to their income should be maybe twice or thrice the amount of income. So they survive on over indebtedness at increasing interest rates. And the government refused to release any information on the amount of household debt. So, this is a true situation, you see.
Except bank debt.
Please.
They do release in relation to bank debt.
What?
Household indebtedness to bank.
Alors, good question. Good question. At least the Germans are honest. I think that moderately honest. But in France, only 1/3 of household debt is to chartered official banks. 2/3 are contracted to some kind of non-chartered banks without any control, and there are no official estimations, but some difficult generalization thanks to the Banque de France over indebtedness household commission. 60% of French households are now over indebted. 60%. And it could be dramatic because at the same time the cost of living is reaching the stars because rise in taxes on consumption and firms rise prices to help the value of their stocks. And it's clear that I proved that there is a perfect inverse relationship. The more the state is running a planned deficit, and the lower households are obliged to get indebted. Because many people forget, especially in Europe, that the state deficit is creating profits and savings. I don't know that this is enough to explain profit, but it is a part of the of the explanation. And I spoke of the ignorance. I was told once by the governor of the Central Bank of Belgium that he was very surprised when I said that banks create money. Because those people, like the former chair of the European Central Bank, Trichet, are pure high official, technocrat, without any knowledge in economics. Trichet was a very curious character. He was one of the closest friends of François Mitterrand, one of the highest members of the Socialist Party. He knew nothing in economics. He had escaped from jail thanks to Jacques Chirac, because he has been involved into tremendous scandals, especially the bankruptcy of the Crédit Lyonnais. So this is a problem, you see. You are speaking to people who ignore or even ignore the fundamentals of economics. This is absolutely pure drama.
We have any other in relation to ISIS, there's this political argument that if the European Union could have one political system, like one central government, then it would be that potent to regulate the financial market to put a stop.
My dear friend, indeed, what could I say? This is exactly what I proposed, and I propose under one condition, that in some way there is some kind of European federal system. But this is exactly what people like François Mitterrand rejected, and now none of the French political elite wants such a system, because they are afraid of the power it could devolve to the people. But you are perfectly right. What could you say? Even a lot could be said about the United States. I hope that Barack Obama would be re-elected, because the Republicans in many ways are worse. But I am not sure, no, really, they are crazy. They are completely crazy. The leading American Republican is a Mormon. But at least, I don't think that the American people, even in the so-called southern Christian belt, would accept what people in Europe are accepting. Even in Georgia, Alabama, and the right and the likes, people wouldn't accept what the Greek had been obliged to support, which means no more schools, closing of universities, closing of hospitals. The power of the people, you see, still exists. People were led to occupy for some time Wall Street. I was with them, I must say. But in Paris, 200 people went to occupy the French Wall Street. The Minister of Interior, who is also the chair of Opus Dei for France, sent the special police force. All of them were detained in a military facility and decreed enemy of the state and severely beaten, and more than beaten. And this, you see, this is the reality of what is, and this is the tragedy of what is going on. We are obviously, this is very interesting. Marx wrote, history never repeats itself, but as a comedy or a tragedy. But obviously, we are going back. We are not restoring the past because it is a situation which never really existed. But as I told you, in Spain, the Neo-Franquist Party won a landslide election. Zapatero had been dismissed. In Italy, you have Mario Monti. In France, there could be a coalition of right-wing or extreme right-wing with a very disgusting propaganda, because now the Sarkozy regime and Marine Le Pen are obsessed by fighting the so-called illegal immigrants, forgetting that a large part of Africa is occupied by the French army. But he doesn't raise any debate. The very country which is always saying we don't have money, obviously spent a lot of money to install an Islamist regime in Libya. I was not a supporter of Muhammad Gaddafi, but I am not sure that the instauration of an Islamist party, Islamist, between combat in Libya sunk the French army because the French army intervened. Everybody knows that. The French army intervened in Tripoli. So, yes, there are possibilities, but for the moment there is no constituency, no political parties, because since the start it was rejected. They never wished the United States of Europe. This is a problem, you see. They hate the United States, the American society and their likes. When you think, as I told some of our your colleagues, professors, that the head of planning at the French Ministry of Finance is a monk, a Benedictine monk. And you can't imagine the policy he is preaching to cut by 50% the purchasing power of the people. So with those kind of people, what could we do?
I'd like to follow up on the previous question. So it seems to me that you think that this notion of Europe reduced to a monetary continent is not useful.
Absolutely.
Or possibly it is useful to some lobbies, big powers in the world, for instance,
Exactly.
giant banking groups and
Exactly.
trading agencies
I would,
are
yes.
playing us. Now, let's imagine for a moment that a new political situation out of participation, democracy, and the people's will in Europe gives us a new Europe, not gives us back Europe,
Yeah.
gives us a new Europe whereby a new economic policy is possible. Which guidelines would you suggest for that situation, which is at the moment imaginary?
Bon, on the first part of your question, I entirely agree with you, of course. The European, the idea of European Union had been hijacked by Mitterrand and the supporters of the Euro. Bon. How to implement such a change? I would say only by warning the people of the lies, by explaining the situation, that there is no God decree but the problem is that in Europe, first, and at least in France and Germany, first, people like me are a very endangered minority. Second, the so-called heterodox people are completely uninterested into going to the people. They debate on arcane questions and they don't dare for obvious reasons. Because if for a young assistant professor, for instance, telling what I say, first, he will never even be appointed assistant professor, he will be never appointed professor, and he will be fired, because now it's possible to fire people according to the new
But
legislation.
you are an emeritus professor, so you don't risk your position.
Yes.
Do you have an alternative set of economic measures to propose? Let's say you have the power.
Yes.
I invest.
Yes. What I would propose, as I told you, is first a true European federal state, giving with a European Parliament, maybe two chambers. Chambers like in the US, directly elected by the people, and one equivalent to the US Senate. Second, a president. We get rid of the European Commission. The central bank becomes the bank of the European state. There is a new pact of growth and full employment. All states commit themselves to get full employment, to restore full employment and growth. thereby the sole limit to deficits is that deficit should be planned, embodied into investment spending for the creation of capital. Like Keynes wrote, at least 50% of capital accumulation should be sponsored by the state. Obviously, the euro, the currency, should be depreciated. It is now grossly overvalued relative to the dollar, to the pound, to the Chinese currency. And everything is done to maintain the overvaluation of the currency. For instance, you could ask the question why, taking care of the situation, the euro is still rising relative to the dollar. Why? Because, as I told you, first, European banks are still indebted towards American banks. And since the last days of the Bush administration, the US Treasury is lending dollars to European central banks. Why? Because probably of investment in Europe of some large American firms. But the second reason is that the Europeans, and especially Sarkozy, recently went to China to ask the Chinese to recycle the dollars provided by the American government to Europe. And indeed, he didn't have a large success. Third, it seems also that there are enormous, large investment from oil countries, especially probably Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries. And also because the American investment banks fear that total collapse of the euro could trigger some kind of end Armageddon of the financial system. So there are solutions. There are in the European Parliament. There has been recently a declaration by an English conservative member who said exactly what you propose, that Europe is now the equivalent of the Fourth Reich, that it is directed against the people and that there should be a total reconstruction of Europe. But the European Parliament is deprived of power, and the problem is that representatives of France and Germany are obviously against any change. So we are back to the question. Finally, the European crisis is a political crisis. The total bankruptcy of the European political elite. And the problem is to get rid of those people. This is the question.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. So to me, the problem seems more than a political reorganization, because in the US, so you've been using the US as a model to some extent in the sense that there is a federation, a political federation, but we still have many of the same problems in the sense that our representatives still do not represent the interest of the 99%, and they represent the interest of corporation. And to me, I think you have to address the issue of the abstraction of financial speculation, because part of what takes power away from the 99% to demand that their government actually do something else, and the failure of the left to articulate a new alternative comes from the complexity of the level of abstraction in our economy as it stands today. We no longer live in the real economy. It might sound cynical, but I can't imagine anymore the real economy, because the real economy, in the sense of capitalism as production, has been diverted away from the center, from the West, to the periphery. So I feel like you must address the issue of, can we move away from the abstraction, the corrupting power of abstraction in the kind of economy that we deal with, to return to something called the real economy? What would that look like? Is it that we have a problem of political restructuring, or is it that we need to address the fact that corporations, right, are the ones that are deciding how money is channeled, what has value, right? Corporations decide what has value. Technocrats decide what has value, rather than people, because people don't understand the notion of value anymore. Okay?
I couldn't agree more with you. You see, first, I don't have illusion about the United States. One of my closest friends, Thomas Ferguson, wrote a lot about the role of money in American elections. Obama had been elected because he got more money than his Republican opponents. And most of the money came from Wall Street. The problem of the US is that Obama, I was in the US at that time, you see. For the first time, people who usually do not vote, voted, especially the Afro-Americans, the women and the young. And the shame is that there has been, of course, some treason of the Obama administration. So on this point, I agree with you. Second point. Abstraction, speculation, yes. There are abstraction. When I spoke of the real economy, I spoke of the standard of living of the people. When I wrote on the real economy, as I deal with data on effective unemployment, standard of living, purchasing power, poverty, and their like. People understood that. I agree with you. Or sometimes I am maybe too much an economist. You're right. When I spoke of value, I should have maybe used the term standard of living or forcing the society to live under its possibility. And this is what is exactly happening. I think, you see, I have been interviewed by some lay groups of the Socialist Party, not indeed at the highest level, but they understood much more than the ruling elite. Corporations and periphery. I am one of those, you see, who are a bit skeptical about the evil of globalization and the periphery. First, globalization always existed. In the paper I sent, I relied on the economic works of Isaac Newton. And too few people now are forgetting that Newton was quite in advance of many people. But even at the time of Newton, capitalism was always global. The problem is that globalization, I think, is overemphasized. And even if there always was substitution for it, but the answer to a transfer of some activities must be the creation of other activities by the state. It's exactly what always happened, which is why, for instance, I am against those worried by the rejuvenation of the Chinese peril, initially invented by the Emperor Wilhelm II in a very well-known book, The Peril Jaune, The Yellow Peril, in 1909. The problem is not that the Chinese are progressing. We forget that until the early 19th century, China was the most advanced country in the world. The British and the French were running enormous trade deficits relative to China, which is why the Chinese economy was completely destroyed during the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Capitalism and corporations indeed, if we were on this point, but it's a very difficult question. If we were only reasoning in terms of sensible economics, be the economics Marxian, Galeckian, Keynesian, by Josephian, their behavior is absurd. Because they are building their own grave. The problem is that capitalism as a dynamic system is dead, at least in Europe. I took the example, I studied the most of France and Germany. In France, France was killed by its colonial empire, which absorbed most of its imports and investment, not of course for the welfare of the inhabitants of the French colonies. But during the 30s, while there was the New Deal in the US and Roosevelt, the rate of unemployment in France reached in 1938 50% of the population. Why? Because the then chair of the so-called heavy industry cartel, the Comité des Forges, said there is only one goal: to cut wages. There is no limit to the cut in wages. So they were essentially obsessed by the cut in wages, and at the same time they sold to Germany. The same in Germany. Contrary to what many people believe, Hitlerian policy was never Keynesian. Hitler hated the public works. They had been initiated by the dying Weimar Republic. Hitler hated Roosevelt and the New Deal. When you look at the contribution to growth during the Nazi Germany, all was connected with the building of the Nazi colonial empire. So now we are in the same situation. A group mainly motivated by ideology, former technocrats, very strong degree of exploitation, which is worse than in the US. It could be compared maybe to some part of the Europe, of the US establishment. But I repeat, I don't have illusion on the United States. Money is obviously driving the American politics. But there is a people. And senators must be elected. In states where Republican senators or Republican governors, close schools, hospitals, I could say that they will not be elected. So there is a limit, maybe, to the power of money. So I am relatively or moderately optimistic to what could happen in the USA. I think Obama could be re-elected and he is obliged now maybe to change his policy. But everything now, you see, in some way, we are now in early 1933. I think it is still time to have change. And it's obvious, for instance, that the American right is doing everything to have an impact on Europe. They support Sarkozy and now they support François Hollande in France to impose more austerity on Europe. And with the new chair of the IMF, Madame Lagarde, a very weird fact. She was a former lawyer of Goldman Sachs, imposed by Sarkozy, and obviously she's entirely supporting the worst policies in Europe. So everything is possible. I would say, you see, I am optimistic. I think I agree with Jimmy Galbraith on this question. The power of the people could defeat the power of money. At least as long as the people are enlightened. And to do that, we need effort. As I told you, you are right, to explain the situation and not to take refuge in the deserted church of Department of Economics. Yes.
I read some articles on the newspaper, and some people, some economics in China, claim that maybe we should create a new currency. Like euro, maybe a new currency in Asia. So in order to create a new financial system in Asia, consider different situations in Europe, in Asia, even all over the world. So do you think it's possible?
Yes. I am quite interested by your question because we lack really books and studies on the on China. There are very interesting developments in China. First, the Chinese government start to change its policy and to stop to depend on exports. Because there is a question which is sometimes forgotten. It is true that China has surplus, trade account surplus, but which is a bit decreasing. But on the other side, there has been an enormous inflow of capital from US, Japan, Taiwan, in China. Second point, a new currency and yes, the Asian Union, but with whom? The main problem is with Japan. I doubt that the Japanese would accept, for a lot of reasons, currency union with China. Because Japan is in some way in the same situation than Europe, a quasi-paralyzed economy, deadlock in the political situation. But the third point is obvious that, contrary to what many people believe, China itself has to deal with enormous problems you are perfectly aware of. Its enormous dependence upon imports of raw materials and energy, environment, and technology. Now, some economists I know ask some kind of economic union with Russia. There are a lot of people around Prime Minister Putin supporting this idea. Because the Russians, and they are right, are absolutely worried by the anti-Russian situation in the European Union. But alone, China obviously can't be the new engine of growth. There is another proposition. We had a special discussion in the US last year on the so-called economic union and monetary union with the United States, which is an interesting question. I was told by a prominent Chinese economist in Austin, a friend of James Parguez, taking care that Europe is now out completely dead, with very dangerous anti-Chinese, quasi-racist policy which is developed. China and the US should form partnership, including Australia, Canada, for a large part. There is obviously a country which is horrified, Japan. And there is a problem of Taiwan, but there are Taiwan and China are more and more integrated. But there are a lot of debates, as far as I know, in China. Much more than in Europe. The level, the standard of living is obviously rising. I am impressed by the Chinese students I met in the US, comparing to the French students. I must say, what a shame for a country which was so admired by people. So China once was the leading part of the world. And at the time of Louis XIV, French was a very backward country relative to China. And the last word, you see, to go back to the point of your question. The New Deal, I studied a lot the question of the New Deal. When Franklin Roosevelt started to increase moderately the deficit, but there was a very strong multiplier. Some bankers were not very happy. Roosevelt asked them to go to his private mansion in Hyde Park. And he said, never forget, your place is in Alcatraz. It was the end of Wall Street resistance to the big debt. So, the problem aussi of the US, I must say, I was in the US when Obama was elected. I cried. Because to imagine a black people elected president of the US, you can't imagine. I was in Texas. In Austin, people were crying of joy, but there were other parts in Texas where people were crying for another reason. But it is as though a black people or a guy from North Africa could be elected of France president. Bon. The problem of Obama is a lack of charisma. Obama himself was a professor of international law. Honest, deeply honest. Not the least scandal in any respect. But he lacks charisma, he is not a good speaker, and he was deeply, probably too much influenced by the legacy of the Bush administration. Because Obama was not responsible of the scandal of the bailing out of banks by Paul Schroeder in the last days of the Bush administration. He inherited a situation of which he was not quite aware. This is a fact. So maybe we must hope in the US, China, you see, it could be my last word. Obviously, European capitalism could be compared to the last days of USSR during the Brezhnev and Andropov administration, an agonizing system, lack of political will, European parties that are like the dying Communist Party, because what are their roles? It is to buy. Sarkozy and Merkel agreed that Greece and Spain should sell all their assets to private corporations. All. Like in France and elsewhere. It reminds me of a former king of Saxony in the 18th century. To pay his debt, he sold his people.
Okay, so I think we close it here. Right?